most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans.
If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, a noted scientist, embarked upon the mission of proving to the world that black people are genetically inferior, without, I might add, the benefit of any formal background in genetics. He became front-page news and won headlines with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every visit. My position then and now is that if a supremacist cannot be rationally debated, perhaps he has a point. After the debate you're now going to see, Dr. Shockley went back into oblivion. I don't claim that the 1973 interview did it alone, but I am of the opinion that it helped. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, racial superiority with Dr. William Shockley. We have two very prominent educators, scholars on Black Journal tonight, and we feel that it is important to defend the First Amendment rights of all Americans. Dr. William Shockley, one of our guests, has had quite a difficult time speaking at some universities, and particularly some black college students do not agree with his theories. On Black Journal, we feel that Dr. Shockley's rights in the First Amendment area are parallel to black people's rights. That is, that Dr. Shockley must have a platform for his views if black people are to have a platform for their views. Dr. Frances Welsing, on the other side, has difficulty in expressing her views on legitimate mass media outlets because many whites do not agree with her theory of genetics. Now let's find out what the controversy is about. Dr. Shockley, please give us the benefit basically of what your theory is.
My principal point, Mr. Brown, is not so much a theory of black-white differences, but is summed up in one word, which is the theme of my appearance on your program and my efforts, and the word is dysgenics. And dysgenics means effectively downbreeding, retrogressive evolution. And I fear that this is worst for the black community, and I particularly welcome an opportunity to appear on Black Journal just for these reasons. And let me say also that when I first met Dr. Welsing, it was not black students who were disrupting, but white students. And Dr. Welsing made a very sincere and I thought extremely effective effort, a well-planned effort. It was not effective with these white students at Staten Island Community College, so I would have a chance to speak. In fact, I think they prevented her from saying what she wanted to say when she was trying to gain me a platform. So my main theme is that we have problems that we should face and we should look at connected with dysgenics, and I welcome any opportunity I have to bring this out so that people can look at it and worry about it.
Dr. Shockley, you are accused of having a theory that is a white racist theory. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that by saying that I've considered whether or not I am a racist. Racist is an epithet that used to damage my self-esteem, but it doesn't anymore. I feel it's untrue. If you look in the dictionary as to what racist means, it means emotional feelings, irrational feelings associated with fear and hate. If I really had those, I don't think I would be here this evening. I feel that what I'm engaged in is a demand for diagnosis, and I'd like to say some more about this chart, which we'll come to probably later, which shows the disproportionate rates of reproduction for the least effective elements of the black community. I'd like to say more about that than we should in just this brief introduction. But I think there is another word that better describes what I'm involved in, and that word is raceology, which means a scientific analysis of racial differences. And basically, I have a faith that reason is a good thing, and I feel, as you do about the First Amendment, but maybe with a slightly different emphasis. I think the really important thing about the First Amendment is it is a way of guaranteeing a high likelihood that truth will emerge as a result of conflicting ideas being expressed, and I have a thesis and a basic belief that truth is a good thing and will be of benefit to man.
Thank you. Dr. Frances Welsing, give us the benefit of your theory, please.
Well, my theory was, I wrote the paper in 1969. I wrote a paper called The Crest Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. And the sole reason behind writing that paper was an attempt to understand the behavior of white people in relationship to all people of color, every place in the world, black, brown, red, and yellow people. And the paper was presented to the Americans at the National Medical Association, the section on psychiatry in neurology, because back in 1969, the Black Caucus in the American Psychiatric Association, we had said that racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people, that racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior, and the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people, I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Francis Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color, and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior, because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all right.
please.
Let me, so that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second. Hello, go ahead, please. You're on Black Journal.
Yes, thank you. I would like to ask the question, why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. It's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down.
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The Imperatives of Ethnic Education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that, speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, Post Box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about telling people how to reach her pamphlet. Okay. But now let me say this chart that I held up a moment ago is very important in respect to this question of why I think there may be what proves a basic difference. But I'm going to say that if there were not a basic difference, in intellectual capacity in the past, there probably will be a basic difference between black and white intellectual capacity in the future simply because of the reproduction patterns. And these are Census Bureau data, and this is the most threatening aspect. And what it indicates is that for the black women of the lowest intellectual social class, which are rural farm women, generally the education is least, the average number of children is 5.4. For women with college degrees, it's 1.9. And so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley, can
for
you
whites,
explain?
let me just finish this. For whites, the numbers are also in this direction, but nowhere nearly as severe.
Dr. Shockley, I think that in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean, it could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black people who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
I'm sure you would explain it,
No, but I
Dr.
think
Welsing,
it's important
but
in
one must say first
fine.
things first. And you've raised the basic question there, and that is whether the disadvantages are primarily a lack of opportunity or whether they are primarily a basic genetic difference. And let me mention one thing, which is that in certain areas there is no doubt about black superiority. Blacks are superior in visual acuity, and they're superior in a systematic way. Now, I don't expect that people will understand the details of this, but I simply want to show that quantitative work can be done. This happens to be a research job of my own, and what it shows, because these points that you see here lie on a line, which is not the central line, but they lie systematically on a line, what it says is that so far as visual acuity is concerned, blacks are systematically better than whites. It's as if their bell-shaped curve, their distribution curve, were pushed upwards compared to whites for visual acuity, or at least for the avoidance of bad eyesight, such that if the same shift occurred for IQ, it would mean that the average IQ distribution would be up by 9 points rather than down by about 15 points, which is the typical average.
Dr. Shockley, visual acuity is probably something that the system of white supremacy has not necessarily seen the need to affect the environment that black people are in so that it will alter the fact that they have visual acuity that is superior to whites. The fact of visual acuity is not attacked in the same way as educational opportunity and job performance is attacked. And I think that
it's evidence for a genetic difference, in my
well, you
opinion.
see what I'm saying? There might be many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior.
If I may, we have a number of people, and we'd like to get to as many as possible. If you could make your answers as, not to compromise your explanation, but if you could make your answers as succinct, I would appreciate it, because we would like to involve the public as much as we can. One moment, please. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was wondering if Dr. Shockley could explain the basic difference between the course he is taking in explaining white supremacy and the course that Hitler took during the Nazism reign.
Thank you.
Well, there are enormous differences. In fact, the lesson to be learned from Nazi history is frequently very misunderstood, and it is a lesson which Mr. Brown has told us about earlier. It's the First Amendment. It's not that eugenics is intolerable. Actually, the eugenic programs, which are the opposite of dysgenics, eugenic programs are not inconceivable, they're not inhumane. Denmark has been carrying out programs with strong eugenic implications for maybe 30 years. And it's important to note that since World War II, Denmark's per capita homicide rate dropped and is now approximately 1/20th. That is, the number of deaths of probability being killed in a year by a violent homicide is roughly, the order of 100 times less for young Danes than it is for young American blacks.
Can I?
Now, but the lesson, let me say what the lesson of Nazi history we have in this country, and it will protect us. It's just the thing that makes this program possible. the First Amendment, which allows freedom of speech. If one believes that is not the right answer, then one has to be one of the most anti-German racists that can be. If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
I'd like to comment because I'd like to say that I don't think that there's a major difference between what Dr. Shockley is doing. I don't think that Dr. Shockley is fully aware of what he is doing and why he is doing what he's doing. But the long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans. Number two, he was aware that the Semites had genetically dominant material, genetic material to the Aryans. And if we begin to understand the way that people who were in Europe at the time that the Semites arrived from Africa, when the Semites arrived in Europe from Africa, they were people who had substantial amounts of color and who had very kinky hair because they were from the continent of Africa. And the Europeans, the white people who were there, had a reaction, a color reaction to the Semites that is no different than the reaction and the concern on the part of people who are white in this area of the world or any other area of the world to people who have the genetic capacity to produce color, who can genetically annihilate their position. And I think it's very, very important, even though Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
I would like to ask a question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time, I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion, really. My research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right. If you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word
Would
that
you
I
translate
mentioned.
dysgenics for me and the audience? Would that be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
but if blacks are a problem and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And
Dr.
I think one can find more humane solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key phrases is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India that bonuses in the form of transistor radios are offered to people.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now, there is a group...
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely. Now, the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now, there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes a dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
Which is more prominent in white people than black people.
That is correct. And I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think blacks apparently have higher heart problems.
Would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Go ahead, your Black Journal, please.
Of what we know about ancient black civilizations, how can American blacks suddenly be genetically regressive?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. What is very interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature in the course of evolution went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is. And that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies. And the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect. Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well,
the motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking children, there was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. At the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top. At the first 6 months, they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Fine.
But
Giselle schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional psychological experiment.
And so is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another call at this point. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. But getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color with intelligence is an erroneous concept. And I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions would have an hereditary, evolutionary background, which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to conceptualize, to be creative in the form field of ideas, and develop other excellent attributes. Now, this is not a racist idea. This could happen to any group who has a tragic history of the black people.
Thank you.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment, that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to. I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We'll find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunity. One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
It's been interesting, to say the least. I'm happy you had your say, Dr. Shockley, and Dr. Welsing. I'm happy you had yours, and thank you for being on.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. I'm Liz Cohen, I'm Dean of the Institute, and I am delighted to welcome you to our annual Science Symposium, which will engage us all today in probing the past, the present, and the future of DNA. The Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study is a distinctive intellectual community where scholars, scientists, and artists work at the forefront of their disciplines and across disciplinary boundaries. In fact, you might say that dedication to interdisciplinary work is deeply embedded in our DNA. And you can see its expressions in today's list of speakers, which includes a chemist, an anthropologist, an entrepreneur, and an explorer, as well as milk. On the other hand, those same populations were much more vulnerable when epidemic diseases struck cattle. Very close to home, my own colleague in the Harvard History Department, Mike McCormick, is reevaluating the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain on the basis of DNA research. Mike is not exaggerating when he calls human genetics, and I quote him, an extraordinary window on a vanished world of migrations and matings that take you back literally to the dawn of human time, end quote. The study of DNA, then, is more relevant to the study of history than might at first be obvious. At the same time, how scientists study, understand, and apply genetics also changes over time. So while DNA changes history, it also has a history, and we are living today in a watershed moment of that history. Let's look quickly at a case of DNA research now evolving. The emerging field of epigenetics studies how environment can alter the molecular processes that affect how genes get expressed. Researchers have shown that toxins, chemicals, and some kinds of trauma can alter how chromosomal code actually gets suppressed or articulated. Recent studies raise the intriguing possibility that social interactions might do that as well. For instance, research indicates that some genetic diseases progress differently in socially isolated people than they do in people with robust support networks. Learning more about how DNA replicates and expresses itself, therefore, might not necessarily reduce us to dehumanized chains of polypeptides, as some ethicists worried when the double helix was first discovered. It might instead help us to better understand exactly how and why the people in our lives, our friends and our families, have a transformational impact on us. The study of DNA, in short, began raising profound questions as soon as Misha began isolating white blood cells in 1869. It continues to do so today, and it will persist doing that into the future. It is thus a most fitting topic for consideration here at the Radcliffe Institute, where we embrace open-ended, complicated, and cross-disciplinary investigations. To get us started, I would now like to hand things over to Janet Rich Edwards. Janet is a Radcliffe alum and an epidemiologist with research interests centering on maternal and child health. She holds dual appointments at the Harvard Medical School and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and she also serves as Director of Developmental Epidemiology at the Connors Center for Women's Health and Gender Biology at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Her research interests include the implications of pregnancy complications for future cardiovascular disease and the impact of childhood abuse on chronic disease outcomes. Janet?
Good morning. Thank you, Dean Cohen, and thank you all for coming here today, and special thanks to our speakers. Last Sunday, as my husband and I were up on the roof watching the lunar eclipse, we recalled the thrill of Apollo 11 landing there and the moment when Neil Armstrong stepped out of that module onto the moon's surface. I was 7 years old. We just had sheer wonder that man was stepping on the moon. My husband, looking up at that blood moon, said, "It's still pretty amazing to think about." And here's what I thought. Yeah, it is, but it ain't nothing compared to what you're going to hear about on Friday. I'm that excited about today's program. For as marvelous as it is to go to the moon, it's equally marvelous and perhaps even more pretentious for the planet's welfare to be able to go into the mitochondria. As you'll hear today, the science of DNA is not only telling us about our past, it's already improving human health and planetary ecology, and its potential for the future seems limitless. But this technology is new, very new, and like any sharp tool, can be used for good or ill. And so we need to develop it thoughtfully and with safeguards. And so in addition to the science, today we'll be discussing the ethical aspects of this new world. There we go. When I was a kid, DNA was pretty simple. You had your nucleotides, the base pairs A, T, G, and C. And you knew that the DNA in the nuclei of your cells was transcribed into RNA, which left the nucleus as messenger RNA, bearing the code to guide the translation and assemblage of proteins from the building blocks of amino acids. Your genes on your DNA are the sections of DNA that actually code for these proteins that make up your cell walls, your antibodies, your enzymes, your hormones, your muscles, basically you. As you probably know, there are long stretches of DNA between the genes, sections that don't actually code for proteins. We've learned that this so-called junk DNA contains instructions for gene regulation, like switches that turn things on and off invisibly. Not, I would say, unlike a Volkswagen diesel exhaust system. The various combinations of the four nucleotides form 64 distinct codes, or codons, that match up with 20 different amino acids. These amino acids form the proteins that form your body and shape your behavior. But think about it. 4 nucleotides, 20 amino acids. There are hundreds of naturally occurring amino acids out there that are just left on the table. What if we could recruit some of those amino acids to make new proteins? What if we could make more effective medicines with them? What if we could make new fuels? If we had a larger vocabulary of nucleotides, could we deploy DNA to make new things? But the first question is, can we even add nucleotides to DNA and get it to work? And that's exactly what Floyd Romsberg's lab at the Scripps Research Institute has done. As you'll hear today, he succeeded in creating a synthetic DNA with 2 new nucleotides, X and Y. With 6 letters in your alphabet, there's a possibility now of 216 codons that can now code up to 172 amino acids. And you can see that the potential for creating new proteins then explodes from here. It's as if the original 4 letters limited us to the vocabulary of hop on pop. With all due respect to Dr. Seuss, who I love, with 2 more letters, we begin to be able to write words that get us to Harry Potter. And with who knows, with more nucleotides, suddenly we can write infinite jest. And then there's your mitochondrial DNA. If this is a cell, here's your nuclear DNA, right there in the red. These little bodies here are your mitochondria. They are your generating bodies in every cell. The mitochondria exist outside of the nucleus, and they have their own DNA, a primitive circular DNA that we probably inherited from bacteria long, long ago. When I was in school, we used to sort of learn about mitochondria at the very end of the section. It was kind of an afterthought. You inherit your nuclear DNA from both your parents. Half your code comes from the nucleus of your father's sperm and half from the nucleus of your mother's egg. When they merge, your nuclear DNA is formed. But the egg also carries mitochondria in its cytoplasm. If you're a woman and you have children, you'll pass these same mitochondria along to your children. In fact, the mitochondria in your cells, whether you're a woman or a man, are the same mitochondria in your mother's line all the way on back. So, while your nuclear DNA is inherited from all your ancestors, your mitochondrial DNA comes from your maternal lineage. This fact offers up both promise and peril. Mitochondria are rather prone to mutation. They lack some of the genetic repair mechanisms that we have in nuclear DNA. And over time, over millennia, the mutations allow us to track who our ancestors were by looking at these mutation patterns across populations. If you're a man or a woman, we can trace your maternal genetic lineage through your mitochondria. Now, men have a second option. We can also trace a man's father's line through his paternal lineage through his Y chromosome. So I was curious about this. Back in 2009, I ordered a gene testing kit from the National Genographic Project, which we'll hear about from Spencer Wells today. You can see here that it's just a simple cheek swab. I was curious about my own lineage, but even more curious about my husband's lineage. Mark is African American. He's a dead ringer for Barack Obama. He is. You couldn't believe how many people ask him if he is Barack Obama, or even are you Osama? Has happened. What do you say? Like many Americans, the records that would allow us to learn about his family heritage just don't exist. So we were very curious to look at his DNA and trace back to his African roots. So first we did my mitochondrial DNA, and here's what we found. Like all humans alive today, my maternal line can be traced back to Ethiopia 150,000 years ago. My maternal ancestors left Africa, kind of in the second wave of people who did, through the Saudi Peninsula, probably following better game after the Ice Age retreated. We came up through Central Asia, then banged a left and into Europe, where we probably would have bumped into the Neanderthals, and John Hawkes will be telling us more about that mixture in our lineage. And then I discovered, not to my great surprise, that most of my genes hail from Britain and Ireland. So then we ran Mark's DNA. Smart scientist and feminist that I am, given the choice between running his mitochondrial DNA or his Y chromosome DNA, I said, oh, run your Y chromosome DNA. We were so excited to see where in Africa his family had come from. So when we got his results, there was something of a shock. Mark's paternal lineage is more Irish than my own. Now, I have to say, we were both dismayed, because confronting us in Mark's genes was a story we weren't sure we liked, was the evidence of history. We were looking at a legacy that spoke of slavery, of human ownership probably, of race and gender dominance. It gave us some pause. Of course, if we thought about it for half a second, Mark's paternal line was not the place to look for his African heritage. We should have checked his maternal line. So that's what we did next. Mark's mitochondrial DNA, of course, told a different story. His mitochondrial mutations led us to West Africa, probably a Fulbe or Fulani tribe. If we reran those results today, 6 years later, we would probably get even greater specificity, because the more people who join this project, the better that it is able to map human migration. But our experience, finding out about our heritage, was, I would say, not an unmixed blessing. And I think there are real ethical quandaries when the genetic storyline contradicts our own personal or our group's or tribe's identity and our beliefs about our origins. but bringing up the question of who has the right to determine your group's heritage. There's also a therapeutic side to mitochondria as well. Mitochondria can be diseased. They get flaws in their own DNA, which can be devastating to health. We'll hear this afternoon from Alison Murdoch of Newcastle University about the brave new way to prevent mitochondrial disease that is passed from mother to child. I'll give you a brief outline. There are a few ways to do this. This is one of them. If a woman has defective mitochondria, when she goes to have a child, there's a strong likelihood she'll pass it on. But once she and her partner conceive, it's possible now to extract their healthy nuclear DNA from the unhealthy egg. If another woman with healthy mitochondria donates an egg, it's possible to strip out the nuclear DNA from that one and replace it with the prospective parent's nuclear DNA. This gives the patient couple a chance to have a healthy child. This has been done successfully in humans. As you can imagine, the process of creating life from 3 parents, effectively, instead of the usual 2, has raised some ethical issues. Dr. Murdoch will tell us about the technique and about the new legislation that has made this legal in the UK. We are also joined today by Jacob Korn from UCal Berkeley, who will talk about the technique you may have heard of called CRISPR, which makes it possible to, if you will, copy edit the genome, specific genes or their transcription factors, those on-off switches in the junk DNA. This genome editing has the potential not to just prevent, as in the mitochondrial scenario you just saw, but actually to cure many diseases, such as cystic fibrosis or sickle cell.
I have a question about a very widespread kind of notion. Well, both John and Spencer, pointed out that notion again. It is that I want to see how truthful the fact that we all originated from Africa. I mean, how about ancient people in the Middle East? I'm originally from Iraq, Babylonia and Assyria, and I have my own family tree over there, and it goes back to, let's say, just before Islam, and that's all. I mean, there's no lineage. I mean, we cannot be sure about that. So I want to know why is that, I mean, how far is that, I mean, how truthful is that kind of notion? On what basis scientists base their notion that we all share African genes originally?
It's based on the fact that Africans have far more genetic diversity than people living outside of Africa. It's just absolutely clear. If I could show you a tree of what the mitochondrial lineages really look like, 98% of the variation is found in African populations. The non-Africans are a tiny subset. Now, we've given them more letters because, scientists started off looking at Native Americans and Europeans, and so they just kind of added new letters. So everybody in Africa falls into what they call the L branch. But L is huge and very, very diverse. This is mitochondrial DNA. Same thing for nuclear DNA. You see far more diversity within Africa than outside of that. And the only way to explain that is that people have been living in Africa for longer, accumulating more diversity. It's had a larger effective population size. It hasn't gone through the sequential bottlenecks that you see in non-African populations as they move into the Middle East, then East Asia, then the Americas, and so on. It's very clear from the genetic information.
Yeah, we do have ancestry from some non-African peoples, but the fraction is quite small from Neanderthals and other people. One thing to keep in mind is that the time scale that we're talking about for the colonization of the world initially by these African people is on the time scale of 50 to 70,000 years or longer, which in historic terms, of course, is 10 times the length of all recorded history. So we are talking about events that are shaded in the past, but they were events that fundamentally shaped what today's genetic variation throughout the world is.
Now, there are some paleoanthropologists who feel that Homo erectus originated in Asia and migrated back into Africa, and ultimately that's the source of modern humans. So in a long circuitous way, ultimately erectus does come out of Africa as well, but they kind of went out into Asia and possibly came back and then went back out. I mean, it's very complicated.
The earliest good erectus stuff we have is outside.
Lupita's results contain something I'd never seen before. When we examined her mitochondrial DNA, the genetic fingerprint passed down from mother to daughter across generations, we found that she carries DNA from the oldest maternal haplogroup, a very ancient branch of the mtDNA tree, just adjacent to what scientists call the mitochondrial Eve, the most recent woman from whom all living humans today descend. When mitochondrial Eve was walking around, there were no human beings alive outside of Africa. Everybody was black in the whole world.
Huh. I predate race.
You predate race. Yeah.
That's dope.
To go into something that he came upon, which has set the scientific world of white geneticists into a fit. Dr. Robinson, I'd like for you to talk about the DNA series.
Yes. A few years ago, my brother and I read a book called The Mark of Oppression. And these two publishers, Cardiner and Oversea, said that they could not understand how is it that a group of people, African Americans, have been bludgeoned over their heads mentally and spiritually for hundreds of years and are still surviving. They couldn't understand it. And they said so in their book. The answer came out in 1996, why it is that not only have African Americans survived the worst mental and spiritual bludgeoning of any people in recorded history, but they are becoming champions of everything in which there is a level playing field. No matter what it is, we predominate in every field. This is why they won't teach our children African history, because they know that once our children get on the same level playing field as their white counterparts, that they will dominate just like we dominate in basketball, baseball, football, track and field, and anything else in which there is a level playing field. So that while they teach their children about the greatness of their European ancestors, they won't teach our children about the greatness of their African ancestors, because then that would be a level playing field in academia. And they know that we will predominate just like all of these examples we've given them, that our children predominate when they know who they are from the African historical point of view. Now, here's what I found out in 1996. A group of geneticists wrote this book. Little tiny pen. Geneticists.
Can you identify where they're from and the group, how it came about?
Yeah, okay. All right, sure. Yes, indeed. As an organization is called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The American Association for the Advancement of Science. Now, this organization is composed of people who study about DNA and the genome. And you've been reading about the DNA and the genomes. Well, this group of scientists came upon an idea by accident at first, that different groups of people had different numbers of DNA series.
Explain that.
Now, a DNA series means that when your DNA is located, and say they get a hair from your head and they subject it to certain tests, they say, well, this is the DNA of Minister Brown, and yours is different from everybody else in the world, all right? Then they found further that not only are their DNA series different, but the number of DNAs in there are different in different groups. Whites have a different number of DNA, and blacks have a different number of DNA series. Apes have a different number of DNA series. Then they found this amazing thing, that the greater the number of DNA series, the smarter the person, the group is, the greater the probability of genius within that group. So they tested the orangutans, these 15 geneticists from around the world. Now, these geneticists came from 9 different universities. And we have here on the cover of the pamphlet they put out the names of these geneticists. And you can see them right there, right beneath the title of this pamphlet. Now this pamphlet, most people have no idea what it means. But breaking it down, and after you study it and have it explained to you by a geneticist, a trained geneticist, you will find that they're talking about DNA series. Now here are the names of these 15 geneticists from around the world: University of Japan, University of China. Yale University is the headquarters of this organization called the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And you see it down there. Now this was copyrighted in 1996. All right. What it said is this, and this is the mind-blowing part. It said that when they tested the orangutan, they found out he only had 3 DNA series. When they tested the gorilla, they found out the gorilla has 4 DNA series, because he's a little smarter than the orangutan. They tested the chimpanzee, which is an ape, and found that he had 5 DNA series. Then they went all into the different races of the world. They went into Europe and tested the DNA series of the English, the French, the German, the Spanish, the Russians, and found they had 6 DNA series. Then they put all of this, what they found from around the world, on a map. And this map really is called the intelligence map of the world, because they tested 116 different human groups and found their DNA series numbers. All of them, all over the world, have 6. And they put the numbers in form of a little flag that you can see on this map. These little flags have a color. And they show, oh, this is upside down. I'm sorry. Yeah. And they showed that the English have only 6, and all into Europe, only 6. Went over into Japan and China, and they only have 6. Over into America, which is predominantly European, and they only have 6. Then they came to Africa, and they came to the part of Africa. Now, all the rest of them, they put in little flag colors. Those flag colors are orange-red, if you notice. But when they came to Africa, found out that the African people have 9 DNA series, from here just below the Shanghai Empire down to the foot of Africa. All those 10 nations, of which African Americans descended from one of them. We have 9 DNA series, the greatest possibility of genius in our group. Now it's answered. This airman gave to the world science, gave to the world mathematics. A black man named Amos gave algebra to the world 3,700 years ago. It's in the world books, it's in the encyclopedias. They don't want our children to know this, because then that would make the playing field level for white children. And you know what happens when they made the playing field level in basketball and allowed black men to play. Out of 29 of the top-seeded players in the world today, 28 are African American. When they opened up the Penn relays, when they opened up the Olympics, and allowed blacks to run back in 1932. We've won all the gold medals. And the same thing will happen in the classroom when they allow our children to learn their African history.
Principle rationale behind it. It was that first bit, A plus B equals C. How does that work?
Which is a limp excuse for being lousy at maths generally. So let me introduce you now to two twins who certainly aren't. Paula and Peter Imafidon is their name. They've just passed the University of Cambridge Advanced Maths A-Level, and you've guessed it, they're just 8 years old. And they're here now with Dad Chris and Sister Samantha, who's not half bad at maths herself, I have to say. Thanks very much, all of you, for coming in.
Thank you.
First of all, congratulations. You're now the world record holders for getting you're the youngest people ever to attain such an achievement. Well, very, very well done. Were you surprised when you heard that?
Yeah.
You were. You knew you were going to do well, though, didn't you?
Yeah.
How hard have you been working?
Well, I find it as a game, so it's not really hard.
Well, you thought it was you treated it as a game, right?
Yeah.
Now, tell me about the sort of things you had to do in this exam, Peter.
Well, we had to look at some questions that may seem difficult, but they're very easy once you just get in the swing of it.
Well, they clearly are for you. With me and Penny. But anyway, I take your point. But I think I'm right in saying, Samantha, because you did this. How old were you when you passed your advanced maths?
I was 9.
You were 9, so they've beaten your record now, right? But it's not just about taking your calculator into the classroom, as you can do these days, or adding up, or multiplying, etc., or even doing algebra. It's about mathematical reasoning.
Yes.
What is that?
It's well, one of it is kind of like using the process of elimination, so you don't have to think as hard as you would do in an A-level paper. So you could say 3 of the questions were right and 1 of them is wrong. So if you work out the first 3 and they're right, then you know straight away that the last one will be wrong.
I guess it's about really understanding maths, isn't it? That's what it's about, rather than just doing adding up or multiplying or even doing algebra. It's about understanding why, which I never got to grips with. I was so bad at maths, they wouldn't even let me sit my O-level because they said it was a complete waste of time even trying, right? You are fantastic. How do you explain this? You and your wife good at maths?
Oh, no, I'm not a mathematician. Neither is my wife, but the big sisters like playing the number game, like Peter was saying.
Yeah.
So they want to outdo each other. So anything that is competitive then becomes something that drives up.
So this goes right through all your children?
Yes.
Everyone is good
I
at
was
math.
very good at competitive apple eating, but unfortunately there were no exams in that.
No, interestingly, you mentioned about algebra. If you look at the bowl of fruits in front of us here, just counting the number of apples, the number of bananas, that's an algebraic activity.
Yeah.
If we take maths out of the classroom and bring it to normal daily life, it's less threatening.
It can become fun, is it?
Yes.
How's it for them?
It is fun. For instance, they don't follow the 9 times table, the normal, the way everybody does it. Peter, how do you do it? Paula, how do you do your 9 times table?
On my fingers.
Okay, how do you do it? Do you want to do a quick demo?
You put down your first finger. That's why you know that 9 times 1 is 9.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you put down your second finger and bring up your first finger, and you know that 9 times 2 is 18.
Very clever, you see. Why did my teacher never tell me that? I might have done a little bit better. Hey, I tell you what, we're going to leave it there. I think you're going to be coming on later to talk about your prowess. Thank you very much, Steve, for being with us. Good to see you all, and many congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
3 9s are 27.
We'll go away and do
How
it.
easy is that?
At first glance, Esther Ucht seems like a normal 10-year-old. She loves dressing up as Elsa from Frozen, playing with Barbie dolls and going to the park or shopping. But what makes the British Nigerian youngster stand out is the fact that she's also a university undergraduate. Esther, from Walsall, an industrial town in the UK's West Midlands region, is one of the country's youngest college freshmen. The talented 10-year-old enrolled at the Open University, a UK-based distance learning college, in January and is already top of the class, having recently scored 100% in a recent exam. It's so interesting. It has the type of maths I love. It's real maths, theories, complex numbers, all that type of stuff, she giggles. It was super easy. My mum taught me in a nice way. She adds, I want to finish the course in 2 years. Then I'm going to do my PhD in financial maths when I'm 13. I want to have my own bank by the time I'm 15 because I like numbers and I like people, and banking is a great way to help people. And in case people think her parents have pushed her into starting university early, Esther emphatically disagrees. I actually wanted to start when I was 7. But my mum was like, you're too young, calm down. After 3 years of begging, Mother F finally agreed to explore the idea. A marvelous mathematical mind. Esther has always jumped ahead of her peers. She sat her first Math GCSE exam, a British high school qualification, at Ounsdale School in Wolverhampton at just 6, where she received a C grade. A year later, she outdid herself and got the A grade she wanted. Then last year she scored a B grade when she sat the Math A-level exam. Esther's mother noticed her daughter's flair for figures shortly after she began homeschooling her at the age of 3. Initially, Esther's parents had enrolled her in a private school, but after a few short weeks, the pair began noticing changes in the usually vibrant youngster. F says, one day we were coming back home and she burst out in tears and she said, I don't ever want to go back to that school, they don't even let me talk. In the UK, you don't have to start school until you are 5. Education is not compulsory until that age, so I thought, okay, we'll be doing little things at home until then. Maybe by the time she's 5 she will change her mind. F started by teaching basic number skills, but Esther was miles ahead. By 4, her natural aptitude for maths had seen the eager student move on to algebra and quadratic equations. And Esther isn't the only maths prodigy in the family. Her younger brother Isaiah, 6, will soon be sitting his first A-level exam in June. A philanthropic family. Not content with breaking barriers to attend college at just 10 years old, Esther is also writing a series of math workbooks for children called Yummy Yummy Algebra. It starts at a beginner level, that's Volume 1. But then there will be Volume 2, and Volume 3, and then Volume 4. But I've only written the first one. As long as you can add or subtract, you'll be able to do it. I want to show other children they are special, she says. Meanwhile, Esther's parents are also trying to trailblaze their own educational journey back in Nigeria. The couple have set up a foundation and are in the process of building a nursery and primary school in Nigeria's Delta region, where the family are from. Named Shakespeare's Academy, they hope to open the school's doors in September. The proposed curriculum will have all the usual subjects such as English, languages, math and science, as well as more unconventional additions including morality and ethics, public speaking, entrepreneurship and etiquette. The couple say they want to emulate the teaching methods that worked for their children rather than focus on one way of learning. Some children learn very well with kinetics, where they learn with their hands. When they draw, they remember things. Some children have extremely creative imaginations. Instead of trying to make children learn one way, you teach them based on their learning style, explains F. The educational facility will have a capacity of 2,000 to 2,500 students, with up to 30% of students being local.